Hey guys, it's the Conic, and in this one we're going to be going over my Herald of Agony Herald, which setup, along with a low budget setup to help actually farm for the high budget variant, and an ultra high budget variant for those of us that just like investing a ton of currency into the build. I'm going to be going over a lot of detail in this video to make it as beginner friendly as possible. So as a result, this will likely end up being a longer video. And as an obvious disclaimer, like all other Legacy of Phrecia theory crafting builds, this build has not actually been play tested in game, but based off of all the numbers I have gotten, it should be a very solid and comfy playstyle. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the build, I want to talk briefly about the expected playstyle for this build, as it might not be for everybody. Herald of Agony is a Herald skill, which summons an Agony Crawler minion for as long as you have Virulence, and this minion gets stronger per Virulence stack that you have. Virulence is a buff that stacks as you poison enemies and is lost over time, gaining a faster loss rate as you gain more stacks. It has been tested to cap out at about 40 stacks. So if you can maintain more than 40 stacks, it is believed that you can maintain any number of stacks. If you haven't already, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps a lot with the algorithm and with hitting our 2025 goal of getting to 2,000 subscribers. A goal that if we hit, I will be revealing my face on stream and on YouTube afterwards. So if that interests you, do consider subscribing. My variant on Herald of Agony uses the Svalin shield to trigger Ball Lightning of Orbiting every time it blocks with a 0.25 second cooldown. This, while skilled with block and Svalin's lucky block, means we can get up to 90% effective block chance, and that also means that we can, just by walking and getting hit by attacks and spells, we are going to be triggering the spell which is going to stack and cap our virulence and summon the crawler to kill enemies. And then for boss fights, we are expecting to get hit less, and as such we have a self-cast setup to supplement the blocks that we are getting, just so we can make sure we're at max virulence at all times. So this will effectively play like a tanky auto bomber during mapping, and then for bossing it's a 1 to 2 button build. This video will be broken up and time-stamped into multiple sections, and I'm going to be going over stuff like ascendancy choices, item setup, defensive layers we're using, offensive layers we're using, gem setups, Spectre choices, and the Animate Guardian setup we are currently using. Starting off with the ascendancy choices, we are going to ascend from first lab into the Herald Ascendancy. We are taking the compulsory Coming Calamity node, and we're going for Future Nostalgia early to cap Chaos Res for swapping to Future Guild in the endgame version. After this, we are going to be picking up Scourge at lab 3, which will be an insane damage boost so long as we can keep the Virulence stacked. And then for the 4th lab, we are going to go either Apocalypse if we want more damage, or Damnation if we want to be tankier. I recommend Apocalypse early, Damnation later once you have more levels coming from other sources. And then in the ultra high budget, we go back to Apocalypse. Next up, let's go over the items we are using for this build. For the wand, we are using a +2 wand with priority on +1 all minion and +1 all spells. Minion damage is a nice bonus, and of course, you can always just craft minion attacks, but all you need is an open suffix for that. We are going for the minions deal increased damage, rune splitting enchant. Then for the shield, we're going Svalin, like I said. The reason we're going Svalin is because we want to trigger whatever elemental spells we put in there every 0.25 seconds to promote that auto bomber playstyle. And we're just going to be getting flat chaos elsewhere, so we can actually poison with this elemental spell. In this case, we're getting that flat chaos from our ring, the Circle of Nostalgia, which comes with a little bit of chaos damage. You don't need a lot, you just need like literally just 1 or 2 chaos damage. That's enough to poison. For the Demon Crown, our priority is an open suffix and +2 level of all minion skill gems. For the Dialas, you want a 1 green 5 red Dialas with the green socket going to your Herald of Agony, and then all your support gems can just either take level or quality. It doesn't really matter too much. It does matter for Empower. You want your Empower being on a red socket. That one is important. Then for Triad's Grip, we're going for 4 white Triad's Grip to convert our minions damage to chaos. Boots, straightforward, movement speed, life, res, that's all. Ashes, prioritize your quality, and non-corrupted, I guess, so you can get an enchant. Circle of Nostalgia, we've talked about it already. It's giving us Herald buff effect for a bit more poison chance on our ball lightning, and it's giving us chaos res. Bone ring, res, life. Only thing that matters here really is that you want a bone ring because you would like minion early res so that your AG and your permanent minions are a bit tankier. That's the main reason we go for bone ring here. And then Stygian Vice, life and res with a Ghastly Eye Joe that is blind on hit to reduce the enemy's evasion. By reducing their evasion, your Agony Crawler has a much easier time hitting without scaling too much accuracy. And then for Flask, we have Rumi's Concoction to just cap block. That is all. We're very high without it, but we just need it for a bit of extra push on this budget. The rest are straightforward: movement speed, phasing, conk ground with some extra regen on the Flask, and then rarity for more gold for King's March, basically. And that about covers the items. We have more in the way of jewels, but we can talk about that in the skill tree section. Now, this build has a lot of defensive layers to make it where it is very difficult to kill. And I want to just briefly go over a lot of these different sources. And by doing so, hopefully give you a holistic picture on what this build offers. Starting out, I want to talk about the most important defense right now, which is block. With your Violent Shield, you have access to Lucky Block. And this allows you to get block chance as high as 90%. As you'll see with my Flask, I do block cap, but without it, we're slightly below. Why block is so important is it has offensive and defensive implications. On the defensive side, whenever we block a hit, we don't take any damage. So we have a 90% chance with our Flask enabled to not take any damage from an attack, and then 88% chance to not take damage from a spell. And if we block any attacks, it then triggers the spell we need to poison. How are we capping block rather? We are using a mix of jewels like Reckless Defense, which gives us a bunch of block but increases the chance that enemies critical strike us, but we are currently crit immune. I'll go over that in a bit. But we're using that. We're using a small cluster jewel. We are taking nodes like this that give us a lot of spell block chance. We're taking masteries. We have some cobalt gems that give us some chance to block attack or spell, as the case may be. We're taking an anoint for as the mountain, which gives us max attack block, as well as a lot of flat block. Other than block though, we do have other layers. Now, with how little we're going to take damage from hits thanks to block, we are able to take advantage of defensive layers like Aspect of the Crab. Now, if you don't know what Aspect of the Crab does, you gain a stack every half a second, and every stack gives you, I think it's about 2% physical damage reduction, up until the max of 12 stacks at 6 seconds, something along those lines. So by just not taking physical damage from hits, you are not going to use your crab barrier, and you're going to stack them up so that when you do take damage, it is going to be lessened by a great deal. This gives us a good amount of physical damage reduction, and we get it from our helmet. That is where I have placed the aspect. You can realistically also put it on boots. I prefer it on helmets because I think it's a bit more flexible there. I don't think there are too many things we're looking for on the helmets. Now for this PoB, we have set the config to 6 instead of 12 because I wanted it to be a bit more realistic, because this build is going to get hit more so than a build that was running around trying to evade hits. We are trying to block, so we are going to be rolling that block chance a lot. So I don't think we're going to quite see 12 block crab barriers as often as we might have otherwise. Next up, let's talk about regen. We have a very high amount of regen, but this doesn't even tell the full story. Now, for the regen you see in PoB, that is a mix of our base regen coming from all the different sources, including like Stone Golem is a big source of regen since we are scaling some form of golem buff effect. We also have a sulfur flask that should give us conk ground um just by killing stuff. So we should have a good chunk of regen there. And I do have Con Ground selected in config. You can reduce that to see that we only drop down to 500 life regen. But on top of that, on top of having 500 to 800 life regen, we do have a different defensive layer that gains a lot of life, and that is life gain on hit. And with how frequently we are hitting the enemies, we are going to be gaining over 2,000 life every second. How do we do this? We're currently going to be employing a Watcher's Eye for gain life per enemy hit while affected by vitality. It is important that you get this mod because you cannot have life gain on hit support gem, because that only supports attacks and we are using spells. Now, where are we getting vitality aura from, you might be asking? We are going to be getting it from a Spectre, the Perfect Warlord. That is going to give us vitality to then give us the ability to gain a lot of life per hit, and as such give us a bunch of regen on or life gain on hits other than our base high life regen, basically. Then we have Arctic Armor, which, because we are going to be standing still so the enemies can actually hit us and maybe casting our own self-cast ball lightning, we actually are employing Arctic Armor and a whole bunch of other defenses that just make us tankier while standing still, so that it's really hard to kill us while standing still, and basically other than a one shot we are not going to die. So with Arctic Armor, this reduces the amount of physical damage and fire damage you take from hits while we are stationary. This means our fire max hit is very high and our physical max hit goes up even more. But we are pairing this with, again, another mod on the Watcher's Eye, which converts some cold and lightning damage to fire damage, so it can meet our fire max hit, which is a lot higher, right? And for this we need to be affected by Purity of Fire. How we get Purity of Fire is, again, another Spectre, the Perfect Fiery Cannibal, gives us a Purity of Fire aura, which is, I think, it's a low effect Purity of Fire, so we only get like 1 max fire res, but it's still fine, right? Other than that, we do have some other sources of defense. Examples, we have Chaos Golem in here. Chaos Golem gives us a passive effect of 5% PDR, and this scales with buff effect. Now, I'm not exactly sure why. Yeah, I'm not sure why the ashes is not reflecting here, but we should. Okay, it is. No, it is. Okay. So with the Chaos Golem, you have it gives us 5% PDR, but by scaling Golem buff effect, this goes up even more. So we are scaling Golem buff effect on the tree. This is 80%. We are scaling on implicit on like our boots, giving us even more Chaos Golem buff effect to just get our physical damage reduction as high as possible to get this a solid 28k max hits. Oh, and by the way, we are also using Steel Skins, which also is going to be paired with a cast when damage taken, so it only procs when we do take damage and we might need it. That said, even without our Steel Skin, we still have a very healthy almost 20k phys max hit and 36, 47, 24 of the others. So pretty solid considering how much power we're able to get offensively from this build. Then what other sources do we have? Our Pantheon is a very big consideration for this build. Because we are not able to use auras, we need to become ailment immune somehow, or at least we need to stop ourselves from the ailments that would really get you killed. And that includes freeze, that includes shock. How are we getting freeze immune? We're getting Brine King. Brine King is going to help us not get stun locked, and it's also going to give us complete freeze immunity. This, while paired with Tukohama gives us even more physical damage reduction while we stand still, again making it so we're very hard to kill while we are standing still, and a bit of life regen while stationary. Then for shock immunity, we are using Tempest Shield, which gives us spell block and, again, shock immunity. So with these two different sources, we are freeze and shock immune. We are not ignite immune. We can get reduced effect of or reduced duration of ignites on like flasks and whatnot, but with how much life we are regening, I'm not too worried about ignites. Then we have other sources of damage reduction. We are currently using a natural affinity, which is a unique cluster jewel that gives us nature's patience. This makes it so a grasping vine attaches to us each second while we are stationary, and for each grasping vine we have, we are taking less damage, to the point where after I think it's 5 seconds staying still, we should have about 10 vines, something like that, and then that'll be 10% less damage taken, if I remember correctly. It doesn't say on PoB, which is weird. Anyways, we are also crit immune, coming from this poison mastery that says enemies poisoned by you cannot deal critical strikes. So by just existing, you should be poisoning every monster in your vicinity. So the downsides for like reckless defense shouldn't bother you, and for high crit maps or crit multi maps, you shouldn't really have to worry about getting hit by crits, except maybe the first time you encounter a pack. But aside the first few hits, you should be fine from crits. And that about covers. Wait, that it doesn't actually cover it. We do have one more defense, and that is coming from a Ghastly Eye Jewel here. This Ghastly Eye Jewel has 6% chance to taunt on hits with attacks. The reason we have this is our Agony Crawler cannot taunt, but our Spectres can. And with our Spectres, and of course we're scaling accuracy, we are going to be hitting a lot between all 4 Spectres. This, why we want taunt, is it draws aggro off of us, but even more importantly, every time an enemy gets taunted, while they are taunted, they deal 10% less damage to every other person than the person who taunted them. So in this case, we are going to be taking less damage, as well as every other minion, when one minion taunts the enemy for 4 seconds. That about covers the defensive layers that we are using to make our character as tanky as it possibly can. Next up, we're going to talk about a bit about offensive scaling, how to scale your damage on this build to get to these levels of DPS on the high budget. Now, if you saw my last video, you would already know that Virulence is a massive scaler for the Herald of Agony. For every stack of Virulence you have, your Herald of Agony gains increased physical damage, flat physical damage, and increased attack speed, and not in small quantities. As an example, in this PoB, you would see we currently have 20k to 37k flat physical damage, all from Virulence, and then we have 1,390, almost all from increased physical damage, almost all from Virulence. And for the attack speed, we have 747% increased attack speed, all again from Virulence, and some from other sources, but mostly from Virulence. So TLDR, max Virulence clusters carry a lot, and as such we have to fit in 6 medium clusters that can give us max Virulence, and the Ascendancy giving us 25. And we also have quality on the Herald of Agony giving us Virulence, which comes from the Diala's Malefiction. The green gem gives the green socket gives the socketed gem quality. So all these sources gives us a max of 115 Virulence stacks. Now, to sustain it, you just have to do a lot. You just have to hit very frequently and poison almost every single time. For that, we need poison chance. Where are we getting poison chance from? Let's just go over here, and we can easily see that for poison chance, we're almost poison capped. Most of it is going to, like, the biggest chunk of it's coming from Herald of Agony. Base, it gives us 20% buff effect, or 20% poison chance rather. And then if you get increased buff effect, that increases based on that base. So if you get 100% increase, that's an increase of 10% poison chance. And in this case, we have, what is this, 160% increase effect, something like that, to give us 36% chance to poison on Herald of Agony. Then we're also getting some poison chance from this cluster over here. Very nice cluster to have, and it also reduces enemies' chaos res and provides the mastery, of course. And then for the remaining poison chance, we're using tattoos to supplement everything. We can still spare one more intelligence tattoo to get 100% poison chance, but the tattoos tend to be expensive, so get as many as you can to get as close to 100% as you can. But other than that, don't stress too much about hitting 100. So long as you can maintain all your stacks, you're fine. Obviously, the higher you percent chance of poison, the more stacks you can maintain easier. All right, another big scaler for this is levels. Herald of Agony scales very well with levels, with each level providing the Herald of Agony, or the Agony Crawler rather, base stats, giving him even more flat damage and some other things. But then the gem gives more stat per virulence as it goes up in levels. So at level 20, you're getting 4% increase attack speed per virulence. But as you can see, at level 35, we're getting 6% increase attack speed. Same thing goes for the increased phase and the flat phase. We get more per virulence with the higher level the gem is. So levels, big scaler. We're giving Herald of Agony levels from Empower. Empower being in a red socket gives us extra 2. So this Empower gem is giving us 5 levels. We're getting levels from +2 Wand. We're getting levels from the Crown. And I think that about covers the... And then we're getting 1 level from Ashes. I think that should cover the levels. And then, of course, other support gems like minion damage given +1, void mana given +1. These are all the level 5 awakened versions. Next up, we have damage conversion. Right now, you would notice that for the Herald of Agony, he does all his damage in chaos. So that means we are converting all his physical damage to chaos damage. Why are we doing this? Because it makes it easier to scale the chaos damage via things like Wither, via Despair, without having to worry about it being split, because at a base, Herald of Agony converts 40% of its damage to chaos, and then it has 60% as physical, which is very awkward. So we are doing this by using a 4 white socket triad grip to convert all our minions damage to chaos. This also makes it so we don't have to worry about any reflect maps, since even our support minions would be dealing chaos damage and don't have to worry about physical or elemental reflect maps. Like I mentioned earlier, another source of scaling damage is reducing the enemy's resistances. So that would be Despair. We're also using Wither, but Wither is a bit more tricky. I see a lot of PoBs lately just slapping on Withering Touch on the Herald of Agony and calling it a day and putting 15 in the config. But if you were to do the math, at 25% chance to Wither on hit with Withering Touch, and with your Herald of Agony shooting, or your Agony Crawler shooting 5 times to 6 times a second, if you even have this many virulence stacks, you are not going to hit 15 Wither stacks, because Wither only lasts 2 seconds. It is not going to happen. Instead, you will end up at maybe 4, 5-ish stacks, maybe if you get lucky 7, but like you're not getting to 15 with just Withering Touch. How I am getting around this by applying Withering Touch to another skill that hits a lot, which is going to be our Ball Lightning of Orbiting, in this case the triggered one. So basically what happens is we trigger this, and it's with Ball Lightning, so long as they are in the AoE, and the AoE is very, very massive, especially when scaling quality. So long as the monster is in the AoE, he is getting hit 13 times a second. That is a lot of hits, each with 25% chance to Wither. So with this small touch, we now have perfect Wither application combined with the Herald of Agony also applying Wither. We don't have to worry about Wither uptime. It should be very strong, and if you really wanted to, you could potentially replace spell like Withering Touch as well, but I think that's just excessive. Now, for a last scaling that is just kind of icing on the cake, we are employing some, not much, poison chance. Why is this? Because the way you scale minion poison damage is very similar to how you scale minion hit damage. The only difference is gems like Deadly Ailments would reduce the hits to increase the ailments. So long as you avoid things that directly nerf ailments or nerf the hits, you can just add some chance to poison, so that when poisons do occur, you're just doing bonus damage basically. So we're getting some poison chance on our Stygian Vice, just 15%, and we're getting it in 1 socket again, which is get 30%. These are not priority stats. Your priority is more so making sure it has Taunt and Blind respectively, but just getting Taunt and any amount of poison chance is more damage. Think of it, that's how you can think of it. So now let's talk a bit about my gem setup. Currently, we have our PoB set up with Vicious Projectiles, which is what you would use in a single target environment. but you'd want to swap this out for Pierce whenever you are clearing, because this, you do not want to clear without Pierce. Now, of course, if you were to switch that, you'd see that the DPS falls to 54 mil. But if you really needed to maximize your DPS, you would switch this out for Vicious Projectiles, a very nice damage multiplier. You can also use Returning Proj, that is also pretty decent, but I think I personally prefer Vicious Projectiles. Then we have on our shield, to get triggered, we have Ball Lightning of Orbiting, and that is linked with Withering Touch. Arctic Armor is there as a reservation to make us tankier. It also gives us immunity to freeze, but we already kind of get freeze immunity elsewhere, so it's fine. Then we have our Golem setup. Ray Spectre, Stone Golem, Chaos Golem, and then Feeding Frenzy. The reason we're using Spectres, well, the Spectres are giving us a lot of offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities, but I will talk about that in a future section. Stone Golem is here to give us a whole lot of life regen. I think with all the buff effect from Golems we're scaling, he's easily, let me see, 850 to 498, so over 351 life regen, which is a lot. Someone Chaos Golem is giving us 10% PDR currently, and then they're all giving us Feeding Frenzy, which is a buff that increases all minions damage when it triggers, and that includes Herald of Agony. Then we have our self-cast Ball Lightning to supplement the triggered on single target. You don't have to touch this while clearing, but single target, this will help you a lot. You can also swap this out if you don't think you need it. If you don't plan on doing much bossing, you can always swap this to make your Animate Guardian tankier, or to have more utility. You can fit in an Offering if you so choose. Spirit Offering would be a big DPS boost here. As you would see, just by adding Spirit Offering, we gain almost 10 mil DPS, but that adds another button, of course. Then we have Steel Skin on a cast when damage taken setup. We have Herald of Purity here, simply so that we can go Future Guild for the physical damage reduction. So this is like having a 15% damage reduction, physical damage reduction aura up. That is all we care about. Herald of Purity. We don't care about someone the Sentinels. We really don't care about anything here. And then Despair to reduce enemies chaos res. Convocation, because the Herald of Agony has very annoying AI. If you do not have Convocation, it can be really dumb, where if you cross a door and it's on the other side, it might just stay there even though you're facing enemies. So Convocation just makes that very seamless, especially when paired with the Mastery that reduces Convocation cooldown. And I do believe Quality also gives us even more cooldown recovery rate. So total, let's see, our Convocation should be up every, where is the cooldown? Every 1.5 seconds. So, and of course, it also gives your minions regen if you keep that up. Then for Spectres, we'll go over that later, and that about covers the gem setup. Now, for transparency's sake, I do want to go over the config I have set, just so we can talk about how accurate it is, and I do try my best to be as accurate as I can. So first things first, you would see I have no endurance charges or any charges because we are currently using Damnation. So we have no charges that are being used. As you would see, they do affect it. I would have to maybe reduce the max. This line doesn't seem to work, so I think I might have to manually reduce them individually, and that might work. I haven't tried it though. Well, our minions are using all charges. We have endurance charge coming from a Spectre, and then we have power and frenzy coming from our AG. Single targets, frenzy charges will be up. Power charges, depending on if the enemy boss has adds or not. If they have adds, you will have power charges. If not, which like literally less than a mil DPS, like slightly over a mil, it doesn't matter much. We can just leave this up, to be honest. Onslaught, this doesn't need to be ticked. We have Onslaught coming from a Spectre. It's permanently up, so that's fine. Minions have Onslaught, same thing. Number of poisons on you. This is the reason we are poisoned. Each poison stack gives us chaos rares, but the reason we are poisoned is because we are using the golden rule for even more virulence uptime. So the way this works is every time I poison an enemy, a poison gets reflected back on me, but my poisons are so weak that I barely even have to account for it. Like genuinely with my poisons, I might be regenerating maybe minus 100 life per second or something, because once, because the only flat damage that is contributing to the poison is coming from our ring. So you want to get as low of a roll for that chaos damage as you can. That's paired with our chaos res just means that we're barely taking any damage from it. But the poison stack on us counts towards us poisoning in when talking about virulence. So it gives us it literally just doubles our virulence generation. For every stack we would have gotten, we're now getting 2 stacks of virulence, which is just big. So that's where this is coming from. Aspect of the crab, like I said, I don't think we'll get to max stacks. If you want to look at what PDR looks like at max stacks, it's 39. It gets very inflated very quick. I don't think we'll be at max though. Feeding Frenzy is active because our golems, our spectres are going to consistently be hitting. And I think virulence, it's very reasonable that we're max with all the steps we've taken. This should be always max. I will have to test it in game, but I think we shouldn't have issues with virulence sustain. Enemy is going to be poisoned. We've talked about wither. We've talked about blind. We have chance to blind. And the big thing about chance to blind is even our agony crawler can also blind. So the minion that is attacking 5 to 6 times a second can blind on hit. Basically always going to be perma blinded. So we have that going for us. And then intimidated. I don't have a source of intimidated anymore, so let's remove that actually. Good. All right. I think I dropped my source of intimidate unless I'm forgetting something. And I think I dropped my source of intimidate. All right. AG has boots that scorch. This doesn't affect damage. I just put it here because it is something that is affecting enemies nearby. The reason we're going for scorch boots is just for the explode, nothing else. We have Forest Warrior. It's giving us onslaught. PoB already calculates the onslaught, but the calling strike isn't calculated, so we manually add it here. Then our minions will be taunting, so we have that as a config. And then for Ascendancy Nodes, like I said, we're taking Calming Calamity. Gives us a lot of mana reservation and then disables auras. As you can see, they're blue. That means they're activated. Red with the 2 hyphens means it is not. It is just a commented. It doesn't actually affect calculations. Nostalgia is here in case I wanted to go back and forth, but it is deactivated. As you can see, it's red. Guilt is blue. It is working. Additional physical damage reduction is what we're currently using. Then Scourge, we have this. The max virulence is working, and then the increased damage is also working. Then we're currently in this setup using Damnation. You can switch that. You can honestly just switch Damnation to, if you wanted to, you could switch to Apocalypse. And as you would see, you would gain a lot of DPS. However, your Fizz max hits, your early max hits rather would go down. However, there's one more thing to consider, and that is you would then be using endurance charges, which would then increase your physical max hits. But then your elemental max hits are a lot lower. And if you don't know this about PathofExile, elemental hits tend to be a lot higher than physical hits. So while you don't need that high of a Fizz max hit, you want your elemental max hits to be very substantial. So I recommend the other way around. But if you really just want damage, power to you. Early on, we do go for that one. And then we recently found out that small nodes will give Herald skills 10% increased damage. This doesn't affect minions, so it is what it is. But we do get 20% increased Herald buff effect, which is just slightly more poison chance, which is always helpful. And now for our Spectre setup, we are currently going for 4 Spectres because we're able to get our Race Spectre gem to level 25. Now for the 4 Spectres in question, they are set up in here and they've also been set up in the nodes. But we're going for a Perfect Warlord. The Perfect Warlord is there to make our support minions tankier by giving them endurance charges, but even more importantly, it's there to provide us vitality. The reason we've spoken about why vitality was important, but this is so we can get life gain on hit via Watcher's Eye. Guardian Turtle gives us physical damage reduction, a flat 5%, and it also gives us determination for if we decided to play around with Watcher's Eye again. Perfect Fiery Cannibal is there solely for the purity of fire for the Watcher's Eye code and fire conversion. And then we have the Perfect Forest Warrior, which gives us onslaught and calling strike. As an honorable mention, you can actually have a 5th Spectre if you were to go a rare chest, but it would tank your damage so hard, it is definitely not worth it. But if you wanted to replace any of these Spectres, an honorable mention would be Gilded Arak. The Gilded Arak is a spider that increases the chaos damage taken the enemy takes by 20%, but it has a 5-second duration and a 10-second cooldown. So it's 50% uptime, so it would effectively be a 10% chaos damage taken increase. Now, for the Animate Guardian, he is completely optional, but I will say by having an Animate Guardian, you increase your clear by so much. It is insane how good his clear is going to be. So to go over why his clear is good, let's just go over what we are giving him. So we're going to give him a Mask of the Stage Demon, which is going to convert all his energy shield into life regen. Basically, he'll have no ES, but then he'll have a lot of life regen. He's going to be getting energy shield because we're taking Grave Intentions, which gives him 20% of his life as extra ES. So he's going to have a lot of regen coming from that. They should make it so he basically can't die to dot unless it's like a really nasty dot. But even more so, we then want to just give him as much life as possible, which is why he is currently linked to minion life to increase that regen even more by giving him more ES. Then we have the main reason we are giving him a chess piece. This is a Warlord Crusader combined chess piece. It gives us enemies have a 30% to 35% chance to explode. This is the elevated explode mod, I believe. And by just having this paired with a Gravebind, which makes kills count as being killed by him, it means that whenever your Herald of Agony kills anything, they're probably going to explode for a 10th of their life. Keep in mind, this is not our only source of explode. We are also pairing it with an explode sword that we are going to just craft 4 life on per enemy hit. The explode mod on a sword is an implicit. So you're looking for a synthesized implicit on the sword that says enemies explode for 8% of their life as physical damage. I will actually manually add this implicit later on, but for now, that's what the sword is going to be. We're pairing that sword with a Victorious Charity, which is going to give your Animate Guardian a chance of frenzy charge whenever he hits, and these hits include the explode. So while you're clearing, it's just going to be perma uptime on the explode. Now, power charges on kill, he's going to be getting kills because explode and Gravebind. So again, power charges in excess. And then boots, like I said, the Scorch, we don't care about the Scorch, we're not doing elemental damage. But the reason we're running this is simply because we get even more explode damage. So with this Animate Guardian setup, you are going to have insane clear. All your Herald of Agony has to do is just hit an enemy, kill it, which with how much DPS we're doing will be very quick, and then the entire screen explodes, doing a lot of damage from all the different explode sources. Now, to briefly cover the other variants of this build, we have the ultra high budget version, which is this should give you an idea for things you can upgrade from the high budget version. I do still have some adjusting to do because I think I plan on dropping Divine Flesh, but I will do that after this video's recording is done. Anyways, this version is gaining power from switching some of our cluster jewels to voices by going for 3 passive voices, or even better, 1 passive voices if you can afford it. You gain an extra cluster jewel, which would give you even more virulence to stack. Then other than the virulence, you're also using a Mage Blood to really help you with that max res, as well as max res and early res, which are stats that we typically suffer from. Now, by having our early res taken care of by our flask and having a progenesis, we're able to drop some res on gear, and by dropping res, we can now go for like a mirrored minion damage ring, which would go up to double of this increased damage. Same thing with the attack cast speed. We can basically just drop res from gear here and there and get even more or stronger stats. We have DLRs, you can get a corrupt there, you can get +2, you can get +1. +1 typically gives more damage than +2 socketed minions, but if this being a very expensive chess piece, very expensive. But anyways, all this to say, on the ultra high budget version, it is very expensive, but you're able to pull out a whopping almost 150 mil DPS. So it's well worth the investment, but it is very expensive. So keep that in mind. Very expensive. We do change a bit of things with the Spectres by we drop the quartz for the phasing, so that means we have to use Forest Tiger. But with Forest Tiger, that also just means that we can now go Watcher's Eye for haste to give us phasing to replace the quartz flask. And I think the Watcher's Eye also just prioritize PDR from determination, so I can then drop the Purity of Fire Spectre and stuff like that. And then for the low budget, this is what you would probably look like once you've come out of campaign. Not campaign, and once you're like in yellow maps, I would say. By this point, you have made your first few chaoses. You've bought some cluster jewels. This doesn't have anything spectacular. It's not using. These are all just rares +1/+1. It would be probably the more expensive pieces. Cold iron points should be very cheap, but you never know. The economy is all over the place. I can't tell you that any unique would be cheap. I can't tell you that any unique would be expensive either. We don't even have flasks set because we'll be running with anything. We wouldn't have automation on any flask, so like doesn't matter. So this is very low budget. This is yellow map to early red map budget. Everything just has life and space for you to get rares. We're getting Jinx Juju, which is always a very cheap amulet. No annoyance. Or everything again. I'm trying to emphasize this is very low budget. And even at that level of budget, we're able to get 9.5 mil DPS because Virulence is that effective. We don't even have we're not even taking jewel sockets because who has the money for jewel sockets except this one? And that's just for reckless defense because we're already immune to crits. This is not a maximum reckless defense either. So this is just what this one looks like. You're trying to get as much block as you can. We can't cap it, but we also have a lot more life, and we are using a cast wall channeling because we do not have a Svalin here. So you'd be using a cast wall channeling setup to get your ball lightning of orbiting and potentially fire some pelting if you need to. Just rolling for all the virulence stacking. And then we pair this with resolute techniques so that Cyclone can actually also contribute to the virulence stacking itself. Overall, I am very happy with what the build looks like, and we'll be rolling this as my second build of the event after Val Absolution Architect of Chaos. A build I will release a guide for tomorrow, complete with an act-by-act leveling PoB. So be sure to subscribe and click that bell icon so you don't miss out on that. Leave a comment down below on what you think of my Herald of Agony setup, and let me know if I should consider making an act-by-act leveling PoB for this. If there is enough interest in it, I will make one and either link it in a pinned comment or make a follow-up video on it before league start if it needs one. If you made it this far, do consider liking and subscribing as it helps a lot. And with all that said, thank you for watching.